The neighbor always complained about the kids. But cameras revealed something shocking. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I never thought I'd be the kind of mother who would spy on her own neighborhood, but desperation makes you do strange things. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how our seemingly quiet suburban life turned into a nightmare that nearly tore my family apart, until we discovered the shocking truth that changed everything. It all started innocently enough when we moved into 42 Maple Street 3 years ago. The house was perfect for our growing family, a 2-story colonial with a decent-sized yard where my kids, Emma and Jake, could play. Emma was 8 at the time, Jake was 6, and they were typical children, energetic, curious, and yes, sometimes loud. But they were good kids with kind hearts, and my husband Tom and I had always been proud of how well-behaved they were. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Harold Grimsby, seemed pleasant enough during our first meeting. He was a man in his late 50s, living alone since his divorce years earlier, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a retired librarian. He welcomed us to the neighborhood with what seemed like genuine warmth, even bringing over a casserole that first week. "Beautiful children," he'd said, watching Emma and Jake chase each other around our backyard. "So full of life." Those words would haunt me later. The complaints started small, almost reasonable. About 6 months after we'd settled in, Mr. Grimsby knocked on our door one evening while I was helping the kids with homework. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice polite but strained. "But the children were playing quite loudly this afternoon. I work from home, you see, and I was trying to conduct an important conference call." I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I'll make sure they keep it down." "I would appreciate that," he replied with a tight smile. "Children need to learn boundaries, don't you think?" That night, I sat Emma and Jake down and explained that they needed to be more considerate of our neighbors. They nodded solemnly, promising to be quieter during their outdoor play. I thought that would be the end of it. I was so very wrong. Over the next few months, the complaints became more frequent. Mr. Grimsby would appear at our door at least twice a week, always with the same apologetic tone, masking what I began to recognize as barely contained irritation. The children were bouncing their ball against the fence again. They left their bikes on the edge of my lawn. Their laughter woke me from my afternoon nap. Each time, I apologized profusely and promised to speak to the kids. Each time, Emma and Jake swore they had been careful, that they hadn't done whatever Mr. Grimsby claimed. I found myself caught between believing my children and maintaining neighborly peace. Tom, my husband, was initially less concerned. "Kids will be kids, Sarah," he'd say when I'd relay the latest complaint. "We can't keep them locked inside all day." But as the complaints escalated, even Tom began to feel the pressure. Mr. Grimsby's visits became more aggressive, his polite facade starting to crack. "Your son deliberately kicked his soccer ball into my prized rose garden," he accused one evening, his face flushed with anger. "3 of my best blooms are ruined." Jake, who had been playing in our backyard at the time, burst into tears. "I didn't do it, Mommy. I was building a fort with Emma. We didn't even have a ball outside." But Mr. Grimsby was insistent. "I saw him with my own eyes. That boy has no respect for other people's property." The word boy came out like a curse, and something cold settled in my stomach. I paid for the damaged roses, but doubt began to gnaw at me. Jake was many things, but he wasn't a liar. Neither was Emma. Yet how could Mr. Grimsby be so certain if it weren't true? The situation deteriorated rapidly after that. Mr. Grimsby began documenting everything, showing up with photos of alleged damage, lists of noise violations, and increasingly outrageous claims about my children's behavior. He claimed Emma had thrown rocks at his windows. He insisted Jake had deliberately let air out of his car tires. He accused both of them of leaving trash in his yard, despite the fact that we had taught them from an early age to clean up after themselves. What made it worse was that other neighbors started to take notice. Mrs. Henderson from across the street began giving me pointed looks when she saw the children playing outside. The Johnsons next door mentioned they'd heard about some issues with noise. I felt like we were becoming the problem family on the block, and the isolation was crushing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was making dinner when Mr. Grimsby came pounding on our front door with such force that the decorative glass rattled in its frame. When I opened it, his face was redder than I'd ever seen it, his hands shaking with rage. "This is the last straw," he shouted, loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "Your little delinquent spray-painted obscenities on my garage door. I'm calling the police, and I'm calling child services. You're clearly unfit parents who can't control your animals." My heart stopped. Emma and Jake were upstairs doing homework. They had been for the past 2 hours. I had checked on them multiple times. There was no way they could have left the house without me knowing, let alone obtained spray paint and vandalized anything. "Mr. Grimsby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "there must be some mistake. The children have been inside all evening." "Don't lie to me," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I know what I saw. Those brats of yours are going to end up in juvenile detention, and it'll be your fault for raising them like wild animals." Tom appeared behind me, having heard the commotion. His jaw was tight with anger. "That's enough," he said firmly. "You need to calm down and stop calling our children names." "I'll call them whatever they are," Mr. Grimsby snarled. "Destructive little monsters, just like their parents. This whole family is a cancer on this neighborhood." He stormed off, leaving us standing in our doorway, shaking and humiliated. Several neighbors had come out to watch the spectacle, and I wanted to disappear into the ground. Upstairs, I could hear Emma crying. She had heard everything. That night, after we'd comforted the children and put them to bed, Tom and I sat at our kitchen table, trying to make sense of what was happening. "This is insane," Tom said, running his hands through his hair. "There's no way the kids did what he's claiming. Emma was helping me with a puzzle, and Jake was coloring. Neither of them left this house." "I know," I whispered, my voice hoarse from the stress. "But Tom, what if we're wrong? What if we're just not seeing it? What if the kids are sneaking out, or—" "Sarah, stop!" Tom reached across the table and took my hands. "You know our children. You know they're not capable of this kind of behavior. Something else is going on here." "But what? Why would Mr. Grimsby lie? What would he gain from making this up?" We couldn't answer that question, but we knew something had to change. The stress was affecting our entire family. Emma had started having nightmares and didn't want to play outside anymore. Jake had become withdrawn and jumpy, flinching every time there was a knock at the door. Our once happy home felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the police station. Officer Martinez, a kind woman with teenage children of her own, listened to my story with patient attention. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Patterson, most of what you're describing falls under civil disputes," she explained. "Unless there's evidence of criminal activity or harassment that crosses legal boundaries, our hands are tied. Have you considered mediation?" "We've tried talking to him," I said desperately. "He won't listen. He's convinced our children are some kind of criminals." Officer Martinez seemed genuinely sympathetic. "My advice, document everything. Keep a record of every interaction, every accusation. If this escalates to harassment, or if he threatens you or your children directly, then we can intervene." Document everything. The phrase stuck with me as I drove home. We needed evidence, proof of what was really happening. But how could we prove a negative? How could we prove our children weren't doing the things Mr. Grimsby claimed? That evening, I broached the subject with Tom. What if we installed security cameras? He looked up from the bills he was paying. Security cameras? Around our property. If Mr. Grimsby is going to keep making accusations, at least we'll have proof of what our kids are actually doing. Or not doing. Tom was quiet for a long moment. It feels wrong, somehow. Like we're spying on our own children. We're protecting them, I corrected. We're protecting our family. The next weekend, Tom and I spent hours researching security systems. We decided on a comprehensive setup. Cameras covering our front yard, backyard, the driveway, and the area where our property bordered Mr. Grimsby's. The system would record continuously and store footage for up to 30 days. Installing the cameras felt like we were admitting defeat in some way, acknowledging that our peaceful suburban life had been irreparably damaged. But as I watched Tom mount the final camera, I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, we would have answers. We didn't tell the children about the cameras initially. We wanted their behavior to remain natural, uninfluenced by the knowledge that they were being watched. Emma and Jake continued their usual activities, riding bikes in the driveway, playing catch in the backyard, building elaborate chalk cities on our front walkway. For the first week, the cameras captured exactly what I expected, my children being children. They were sometimes loud, occasionally careless, but never malicious or destructive. I watched footage of Jake carefully walking around Mr. Grimsby's flower beds to retrieve a wayward ball. I saw Emma pick up a piece of trash that had blown into our yard from somewhere else. They were good kids, just as I'd always known. But Mr. Grimsby's complaints didn't stop. If anything, they became more bizarre and frequent. On Monday, he claimed the children had been playing loud music at 6 a.m. The camera footage showed our house completely quiet at that time, with no signs of activity until Emma and Jake left for school at 7:45. On Wednesday, he accused them of letting his garden hose run all night, wasting water. The cameras clearly showed that neither child had been anywhere near his property. On Friday, he insisted that Jake had been throwing rocks at his house during school hours. The timestamp on the footage proved that Jake had been in class at the time of the alleged incident. This doesn't make sense, I told Tom as we reviewed the week's footage. He's accusing them of things that are impossible. Why would he lie about stuff that's so easily disproven? Tom frowned at the computer screen. Maybe he's genuinely confused? Some kind of early dementia or mental health issue? It was the most charitable explanation we could think of, but it didn't feel right. There was something too deliberate about Mr. Grimsby's accusations, too specific, and his anger seemed too real, too focused. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in November. I was reviewing the previous day's footage, fast-forwarding through long stretches of empty yard, when something caught my eye. At 11:47 p.m., long after Emma and Jake were asleep, a figure appeared on the camera that monitored our front yard. I slowed the playback to normal speed, my heart beginning to race. A man was moving stealthily across our lawn, staying in the shadows cast by our large oak tree. He was wearing dark clothing and what appeared to be a baseball cap pulled low over his face. In his hands, he carried what looked like a bag of some kind. I watched in growing horror as the figure approached Mr. Grimsby's prized rose garden, the same garden he'd accused Jake of damaging months earlier. The man pulled something from his bag and began deliberately damaging the flowers, snapping stems and scattering petals across the ground. Then he turned slightly, and the security light caught his profile. It was Mr. Grimsby. I called Tom immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial his number. He was at the office, staying late to finish a project, but he came home immediately when he heard the panic in my voice. "Show me," he said grimly. We watched the footage together, both of us silent with shock. There was our neighbor, methodically destroying his own garden in the middle of the night, creating the very damage he would blame on our children the next day. "My God," Tom whispered. "He's been setting them up." "Yay?" We spent the next hour combing through weeks of stored footage, looking for other incidents. What we found was a pattern of deception so systematic and cruel that it made me physically sick. There was Mr. Grimsby at 2 a.m., using a key to scratch his own car, and then carefully placing one of Jake's toy cars nearby as evidence. There he was again, deliberately overturning his garbage cans and scattering trash across his yard, making sure some of it blew onto our property. In another clip, we watched him sneak into his own backyard and spray paint crude words on his garage door. The same graffiti he'd screamed at us about, the incident that had finally pushed me over the edge. Most disturbing of all were the clips that showed him watching our house for hours, hidden behind his curtains, documenting our children's every move with what appeared to be a camera with a telephoto lens. In several clips, we could see him taking pictures of Emma and Jake playing innocently in our yard. "We have to call the police," Tom said, his voice hollow with disgust. "Wait," I said, my mind racing. "We need to be smart about this. Let's make copies of everything first, and let's see if we can figure out why he's doing this." The why became clearer as we continued reviewing footage. In clip after clip, we could see Mr. Grimsby's obsessive attention to our children. He wasn't just framing them for vandalism. He was studying them, photographing them, learning their routines and habits. There were shots of him standing at his window at the exact times the kids walked to and from the school bus. Footage of him lurking near the fence when they played outside. Most chilling of all, there was a clip from the previous week showing him attempting to approach Emma while she was alone in our front yard, calling her over to the fence that separated our properties. Thank God she had been taught never to talk to strangers without permission. She had run inside immediately. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about property damage or noise complaints. Mr. Grimsby wasn't trying to get us to move away. He was trying to isolate our children, to make them feel unsafe and unwanted in their own neighborhood. He was breaking down their confidence, making them afraid to play outside, easier to approach and manipulate. "He's a predator," I said, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Tom's face had gone white. "We're calling the police right now." Officer Martinez arrived within an hour, along with 2 other officers and a detective from the Crimes Against Children unit. We showed them everything, the footage of Mr. Grimsby vandalizing his own property, the evidence of his surveillance of our children, the timeline of his escalating accusations that corresponded with his own destructive activities. "This is substantial evidence of harassment, filing false police reports, and stalking," Detective Walsh said after reviewing the footage. "The surveillance of your children is particularly concerning. We'll need to interview them about any approaches or interactions they may have had with the suspect." The interviews with Emma and Jake were heartbreaking. Once they understood they weren't in trouble, they opened up about months of fear and confusion. Emma revealed that Mr. Grimsby had tried to talk to her several times when she was alone, asking her about her daily schedule and whether her parents were home. Jake admitted that the man had offered him candy on more than one occasion, always when no adults were around. "Why didn't you tell us?" I asked, holding both my children close. "We thought we'd get in trouble," Emma said through tears. "He said that if we told you, you wouldn't believe us, because we were already in trouble for being too noisy. The manipulation was more extensive and more sinister than we'd imagined. Mr. Grimsby had been gaslighting our entire family, using our own desire to be good neighbors against us, making us doubt our children and ourselves. The police arrested Harold Grimsby that evening. A search of his home revealed hundreds of photographs of our children and other neighborhood kids, detailed notes about their daily routines, and evidence that he had been researching ways to get families with young children to move out of the neighborhood. During questioning, the full scope of his plan emerged. Grimsby had been convicted of child endangerment in another state 15 years earlier. After serving his sentence and registering as a sex offender, he had moved to our neighborhood specifically because he hadn't been required to notify residents of his status under local laws. His goal had been to make life so miserable for families with children that they would eventually move away, leaving him in a neighborhood of adults only. Our family had been his test case, and when his campaign of harassment hadn't driven us away, he had been preparing to escalate his approach to our children directly. The trial was swift and decisive. The video evidence was overwhelming, and Mr. Grimsby's history made his motives clear. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison for stalking, harassment, filing false reports, and violating his parole conditions from his previous conviction. More importantly for our family, his conviction meant that our children were finally free from months of fear and self-doubt. Emma started playing outside again, her laughter returning to our yard. Jake stopped flinching at unexpected sounds and began bringing friends home from school again. The healing process took time. We all attended counseling to work through the trauma of being systematically manipulated and threatened. Emma, in particular, struggled with anxiety for months, afraid that other adults might not be trustworthy. Jake had nightmares about bad men watching him through windows. But slowly, gradually, our family found its way back to happiness. The other neighbors, horrified when they learned the truth, went out of their way to be welcoming and supportive. Mrs. Henderson brought cookies and apologies. The Johnsons invited us to their 4th of July barbecue and made a point of telling everyone how sorry they were for doubting us. "I should have known," Mrs. Henderson said one afternoon when she stopped by with Emma and Jake's favorite cookies. "Those children of yours have always been angels. I'm ashamed I let that man poison my thoughts against you." The experience taught us all invaluable lessons about trust, vigilance, and the importance of believing in each other. I learned to trust my instincts about my children and to never again let outside pressure make me doubt what I knew in my heart to be true. Tom and I became advocates for other families facing neighborhood harassment, sharing our story and encouraging parents to document everything and trust their instincts when something feels wrong. Most importantly, Emma and Jake learned that sometimes the loudest complainers are the ones with the most to hide, and that their parents will always fight to protect them, no matter how convincing the lies arrayed against them might be. We kept the security cameras, though we hoped never to need them again. They serve as a reminder that evil can wear the mask of respectability, and that the most dangerous predators are often the ones who work hardest to appear normal and concerned. A year later, a new family moved into Mr. Grimsby's old house, a young couple with twin toddlers who fill the air with the sound of innocent laughter. When I see them playing in what used to be Harold Grimsby's meticulously maintained yard, now delightfully chaotic with toys and chalk drawings, I feel a deep sense of justice. The children won, the truth won, and our neighborhood is finally safe again. Sometimes I still watch the old footage from those terrible months, not out of morbid curiosity, but to remind myself how close we came to losing everything. How a predator nearly succeeded in breaking apart our family by turning us against each other and making us doubt our own children. But mostly, I watch the new footage, Emma and Jake playing freely in their own yard, their friends joining them for games of tag and hide and seek, the sound of childhood joy echoing once again through our neighborhood. It's the most beautiful surveillance footage ever recorded, and it never gets old. The neighbor always complained about the kids, but in the end, it was the kids who saved us all.